Thank you very much. So first of all, I'd like to sort of welcome and thank Tony, David, everyone in the X-World team. I think this might be my 10th X-World. I think I've done one every time I've been at Jamf, and I've been at Jamf for 10 years, so it's easy enough to work out for that there. But yeah, no, so it's always fun coming back, reconnecting with people, meeting new people, especially if it's your first time. Yep, my name is Daniel MacLaughlin. I'm a senior consulting engineer with Jamf. That means something, I'm sure, but who knows? But we're going to be talking today about macOS VMs, and I say we because I could not do a lot of this presentation without a lot of help from a friend and colleague of mine, Rob Potvin, he did a very similar presentation at Macaduck a few months ago. Then he was on the podcast talking about this. So he's really stealing my thunder on a lot of this. But no, he helped me out a lot with that. He and I had collaborated a bit on his presentation at Macaduck. I think he even mentions my name at the end of it when we're chatting about ECRs. So there are some things about it that are similar. There are some specific nuances of things I found really nerdy. We can get into the depths of it, some back and forth interactivity, because that's what socially awkward people love. But I will put a link to his session at the end of that. But if you have watched his session, stand up now, go next door, learn more about brewing than baking. So let's kick it off. So yeah, you might have guessed with the session title, there's going to be a bit of a baking thing. We're going to go through from just being interested in a topic. So if you're just getting started with baking, you might just be interested. You're not going to dive straight in. You're not going to go out to the shelves, maybe you will, but you're not going to just sort of start making something from scratch. You're going to be following a recipe, but first you might be interested in what recipe you're following. What are you interested in? Is it carrot cake? Is it mud cake? Is it a cupcake? It's cakes everywhere, but we're going to be talking about things like that. Then we're going to sort of move into your sort of ready-made meals, the things that are just like available off the shelf for that admin on the go. And then we'll go for the ones that are a bit more advanced workflows. That's probably going to be the meat. I'm mixing my analogies like crazy here now. Pork pie, that's got meat, that's baking, kind of, no. Meat pie. So then we go to that some more of like the advanced ones there, how you can automate and process that there. And then because we're all about community, we're all about collaboration and sharing, much like people do with their recipes, we want to sort of share where you get all this information. So that's where we'll get our resources at the end. So when we're cooking, as I mentioned, or baking, or anything in the kitchen, we need to get to know our ingredients, right? So we need to, so I do enjoy cooking, I do a lot of cooking at home, but if you're sort of getting involved in that there, you might actually find some origins of a dish. You might start reading cookbooks, often have like an about the origins, the history, and things like that, and this is going to be no different. But we need to sort of first understand sort of like our ingredients, so to speak, when we're virtualizing macOS. Hardware is a big one. Hardware is a key requirement. You cannot just grab something, and a lot of things, Hackintosh is a separate thing, but you can't just grab something off the shelf and then start putting a macOS operating system onto it. The kernels, we've heard a few references about kernel extensions and kernel things like kernel is very important, not to be confused with popcorn, but how that informs both of an operating system and with the hardware and that kind of relationship there. And it's also been mentioned, this has been great, there's been a bunch of people throughout today that have already sort of laid some foundations for my talk. It's making my job very easy. And so if you all start falling asleep, that's because I'm falling asleep too. But Apple sort of have this native virtualization framework, which really sort of helped enable us as admins to be able to leverage these tools. But then you also need to know, what are we doing? All right, this is perfect. I'm going to spin up Tiger, and we're really going to go back to the good old days. Yeah, no. So these are sort of like aspects of that there. But we're going to think first back to our backup. We're going to go over to the time machine, and we are going to go to those good old days. We're going to talk about where we sort of came from with that. That's the origin of the dish, the history that came behind it. So let's go back in time. Yeah, there's a blast of the past, isn't it? And we had Intel chips. Who remembers those? Yeah. Who still has those? Yeah, that's less of a rejoicing there. But when Apple moved from PowerPC to Intel, so remember that sort of days, and that actually was probably the first proper iteration of Apple looking to support virtualization. We had operating systems that were available to that same chipset. You could even boot camp. You didn't even have to virtualize. You could hardware refit, or there was boot camp assistant. There was a bunch of ones that there. I think at one point even Microsoft Windows ran better on Apple hardware than it did on, yeah, remember that? Or I think someone gave Steve Ballmer a MacBook to sign. telling him it was running Windows. I don't think he found that funny, but we do. But yeah, but Apple actually were happy for you to run Windows on it than for you to run Apple operating system on any other hardware, right? That's always been the common goal with Apple on that there. And so this sort of led us into some tools that were available to us admins. We had like our VMware Fusion, we had Parallels Desktop, or for some of the even more advanced ones, they might have actually had Apple servers, if we remember those. Server hardware, rack mounted even. Going back in time a lot here now. But you could actually, it was a gray area for a long time, but you could run and install VMware ESXi on Apple hardware. Xers and Mac Pros, I think, were the two officially supported hardware. Mac Mini was supported? Okay. Don't have that in my notes, but there we go. But yeah, so and then you could actually run that, and then because it was Apple hardware technically as the end result, Apple operating system on there with that hypervisor layer was okay. It was accepted, it was allowed, and it gave you some functionality like that. It was like, hey, their server still existing. And then we could even actually keep going with that hypervisor, and we could then leverage device enrollment program. All right, we could say like, yep, we're going to modify this. We've got a room full of broken, dead MacBooks or MacBook Airs, MacBook Pros, Mac Minis, whatever it's going to be. We're going to get those model identifier, the serial. We're going to inject that in as it boots up. It's going to activate the Apple servers, and it's going to pretend to be a real, genuine device. It's a while ago, though. Hasn't really worked since. So what changed? Well, who remembers 2020? Yeah, so a couple of things happened in 2020. It was a bit of a turbulent year, I'd say, for a lot of admins because Big Sur came out. Apple Silicon was the new things. No more Intel chips. This was going to be the thing there. I think something else happened in 2020. I'm not quite sure, but that was our main focus, right? Yeah. And so with that, and with Apple Silicon being the required hardware, standard Anvil drops, we thought these were all going to go away. And for quite a while they did. Like these apps just did not work. They're like, what is this ARM processor you're trying to run? Absolutely not, go away. So that was what we thought as admins, like, okay, gonna have to go, we're gonna have to get a bunch of extra test machines, our physical hardware, stuff like that. Now, yes, please still have physical hardware because you will need to test on physical hardware, but it was not the end. Apple was actually ready for a lot of admins to be coming at them with pitchforks and torches to say, what are you doing to us? You're killing a lot of our workflows. So with the macOS 11 release, at least in the very early stages, this has improved in every subsequent operating system. Apple released out a virtualization framework. This is available on the developer guide. It's not great reading, but it's at least informative. But that was perfect. There was much rejoicing. But we've sort of seen like that first iteration of it wasn't great. The display drivers didn't work too well. There was no trackpad support, I believe. Native Apple keyboards didn't always like it. There was shared folders, none of those things like that. And all of those have improved each operating system release. We've had shared folder support, I think, came first, then display refits. I think the biggest one has been that iCloud support, or like it's a limited support, I think is Apple's official term, where you can sign in with an Apple account through a VM to then use the App Store. But as Sir Robert mentioned in his talk earlier, there's some gotchas and some nuances to it where you need to be in the same Apple account on the outer bare metal that's running that same VM, because there's a bit of that pass-through. But it does mean that you could use apps and books to then test out that kind of stuff. Whew. So that's us reading through the About Me section of the origins, the history, where are we at there now of the cookbook. So let's sort of like go through our ingredients again. So we need a macOS machine running Apple Silicon. Yeah, M1 is fine. If you want to do some more advanced things, you will need to run like an M3 chip or higher. Biggest one of that would be nested containerization or nested VM. So a VM inside a VM needs to be an M3 chip or above. We also need our operating system. We need some installers. So we need an IPSW, or you can get your ISO DMG type thing, depending on what tool you're using to virtualize. If you're unsure how to get those, shout out to Nindy, who wrote a very useful tool called Mist. Lets you build out packages, ISOs. I think you can even just get the raw IPSW, or you can download it from Apple. And then we do need an application, something that will tie into Apple's virtualization framework. Read this in there and then sort of containerize that. You're not sort of just going into Finder and say, build me a VM. You do need some application that's going to leverage that framework for it. So we've got our VMware Fusion again, UTM, very useful, very nice, and Parallels Desktop. Parallels Desktop and VMware Fusion are probably the licensed versions, and UTM is more of your open, available for those who don't have the budgets. And as I said, like these are tools for the admin on the go. They're like, well, I don't really want to know how I'm downloading this. I don't really care. Just give me the one off the shelf. It's already wrapped, ready to go. So UTM and Parallels as examples have those available. You don't even have to download anything. It will download it for you. Just click on next, wait, depending on your network. Don't try it on this network. I did, and it didn't work, which is why some of you had slow internet earlier. Yeah, my apologies. But it does give that admin, especially if you're just starting out of like, all right, I want to try and virtualize. How am I going to get started? Look at these sort of tools there. You don't have to have too much of an uptick on that. So, did that build? No. There we go. So we've got our ingredients. Yes, Anvil drops, Anvil invitations all day. But these are sort of those tools for the admins on the go. But what they go, those adventurous cooks, you know, feeling a bit master chefy. You know, they're starting to experiment. We're like, well, actually, I don't want that VM to go through the setup assistant and then do all that stuff like that. I actually want to have this all pre-baked. I want to put a dash of vanilla in there, or I want to sprinkle some cumin, or I don't really bake. I cook, but I don't bake. So, but these are the sort of the type of admins that really want to get their hands dirty. They really want to actually go from start to finish, that automate right from the get-go. They're not really going to try and use too much that's off the shelf. So, the main sort of tool that's sort of centered around this, which is that one on the left-hand side, is called Tart. Hence baking theme, Tart, all that sort of stuff like that. But before we sort of just get into that crutch there, like show of hands, who's used Docker? Okay, perfect. For those who haven't, or just shy, and that's allowed, there's a lot of similarities with how you've been playing with Docker that Tart is actually also looking through. Again, it's been sort of mentioned in a couple of previous sessions, talks around containerization, things around how Docker interacts with registries and getting those files back. There's a lot of similarities with how Tart is in place. So that knowledge transfer across is actually quite simple. And the way we're sort of seeing the enhancements on the macOS virtualization, I could see further and further aspects of that Docker there. Or the combination of there where you may not need Docker anymore, and something like this could actually leverage that a lot better. But anyway, so Tart is a tool developed by the team at Cirrus. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm not quite sure. It's not really written out phonetically. And they have a ton of resources available on their website. So yeah, tart.run. It's got a fair source license. So from personal devices, you can download that, run it up. I think if they have some expectations, I think if you're running it on an organization with, I think it's 100 CPUs, they're going to want you to pay for it. I think that's reasonable, because if you're benefiting that much from a tool like this there, we should really sort of give back into that community and those things there they give us. But all that information there, their information about their FAQs, their licenses, and a lot of automation things. So I encourage you to go through that website more in your own time, but how would we get started with using this tool? And they have a quick start, and very simple. Nextdoor can tell you how you can do homebrew, that's fine. But we install it through Brew. There are other ways you can install it, but Brew is probably the most preferred and common way. Then you do things like clone. Like what we would do for Docker, just replace the word Docker with Tart. We are cloning down from a repository. This is one that we provided. If you're unsure of this sort of structure, the word after the colon, which in this case says latest, that is a tag of a specific image. So you can have different images like beta, dev, test, and that kind of stuff. And then the next end of that there where it says Sequoia base, that's what you're calling it locally on your machine. So the URL is the web thing. It's going to download. I think that one's about 20 gig thereabouts, because it is still a fully set up provisioned virtual machine in that operating system. They have a lot of other ones, like, they have ones for Tahoe, they have ones for Sonoma, they can do for ones out there. And they also have different variations of it available for you. So this one is just using the base, so macOS Sequoia base. They have ones that, the only thing with base, I think, is a native operating system, but Brew is already pre-installed. There's also got Xcode with a specific version. That's got Xcode pre-installed with that version. They also have one called Runner, which has, I think, 4 or 5 different versions of Xcode installed. for your more advanced CI/CD pipelines where you're trying to maybe run different things against different Xcode versions, right? And then when that's downloaded, you just run it. And that is literally it. You can copy it as well because it's going to be local, so you can download that as a raw before you even run it or make any changes, clone it a couple of times locally, and then run the one you want. Just keep your names, naming convention that makes sense to you. Okay, and there's a very useful terminal help page for it. So if you run through the commands with help, and each of these are the parent commands, each of them have a sub help page as well. So if you went like help create versus just help, it would then give you the sub commands available for create and clone and so on and so forth. So again, more in your own time, go through that, play around with it, break it, don't call me, don't call support. You can call support, but don't call me. But yeah, so that's really actually quite intuitive and very easy to sort of get you going with that there. Which is probably now where you're thinking, this isn't very advanced. You're correct. The quick start is very easy. It's like aligned with what we saw with Parallels and UTM. We're just like, do this, do this, do this, and we're running. So why is this even a tool that we're mentioning under the advanced workflows when it's part of the ready-made meals? And it is in the ready-made meals in that quick start, but it's advanced options that are available with its integrations and orchestrations that sort of adds it and carries it through to a more master chef-y type approach where you're really mixing and baking. So show of hands, who has heard of Packer? Okay, who has heard of Terraform? Okay, so the organization that brought you Terraform brings you Packer. So Packer is that icon there. HashiCorp, which is now an IBM company. Let's see what we do with that. But yeah, so Packer is part of this sort of same sort of framework where it's used to automate image creation, not just macOS. You have your whole sort of YAML file for what you're sort of setting up, but as an intuitive tool that the same way if you've played around with Terraform and something like that, you're already a little bit more exposed to it. If you are unsure, so we can use Packer to automate the creation of those VMs, but Cirrus Labs and stuff like that have also provided pre-made Packer files for you to actually look at and see what they look like, and it's all available on their GitHub. So if we have a look at those, this is on the GitHub there. And so we're like, well, we've already got this core VM that they're already providing. Why would I even bother Packer and stuff like that? So maybe you want to tailor it a bit more to your organization. So you might have additional applications. You might not want Brew pre-installed. You might not allow Brew to be installed, but you need different aspects. Maybe you need antivirus installed for some reason, or some additional checks if you're doing it for your CI/CD. Or maybe you're building out this VM for someone else to test, and you want it to be pre-made as much as possible for someone to test in your environment. You know, this is not necessarily something just for developers. It's going to be an option for you to tailor it for your organization. So we start with like the Packer file. We say, okay, what's a required plugin? In this case, it's going to be Tart. It's a required plugin. We set that, no problem. Where we can also start customizing all of this is then we can even sort of start specifying what version is it coming and downloading. That's important if you want to have variations on this there. What is even the default account? Because the one you're going to download directly from them is already going to be at the desktop screen. It's already gone through the entire setup assistant. There is the default user account, and it is very secure for your organization. It starts as admin. Maybe that's something you are not allowed to have in your organization. Depends on what you're using this for. So we can even sort of send key combinations and create files on the fly with there. So if I blow this out a little bit, and it's a little hard to see, I'm sorry. I didn't expect it to be that blurry on the screen, but in the little tags in between different things like that, you can actually see where it's like a wait. So the wait 30 seconds or 60 seconds, and then next to it will be like tab or space bar. And it's literally sending those keys as part of the VM spinning up. Why might that be useful? Well, in this situation, this is during the setup assistant. So you could actually have this file, turn on the VM, and it's at the setup assistant. Well, okay, we have to wait 60 seconds for that Apple loading bar to go through. And this took a little bit of nuances with it, but you can see some of the comments where you have to type language Italian first. Before then, you can then type in English. It's a weird bug, and they're like, all right, that's our workaround, that's fine. But it means that we could actually have this automation occur without you needing to be involved. It could do a completely headless VM creation without any interaction from you as an admin. So I think it's kind of cool in a very nerdy way. So really the only thing we can't automate though is just that MDM enrollment if you were trying to do that, because Apple are very strict on that and a user needs to be involved with that. But you can do a lot of work to get the VM into a state that's ready for that. And I'll show you that in a second. And I tried making my own video of this here, but I stole this from Rob because the hotel internet wasn't playing ball and the Wi-Fi here also wasn't. So this is got a Packer file in the background, and this is triggering the VM at the front. We can see things are moving around on the setup assistant screen, right? But very important, the mouse isn't moving. There's no actual interaction. It's not sort of like it's sped up. There is a lot of time. There's a lot of waits. If you're doing this in a way that you're automating it entirely, you don't need to be looking at this, right? But the mouse isn't moving at all is the thing I want to sort of take away. It's a completely unattended setup where it's someone doesn't need to involve. The Packer file is sending those key commands. It's telling it to type in the username, the password, verify, tab, enter, space bar, all of these things like that, right? Okay. Who's seen Setup Assistant enough to know what's happening next? Yeah? Okay. Let's not too worry about that. So but at the end, and in this example we had there, it actually created the enrollment profile. So reading in the Packer file, you can pass through variables like your enrollment ID or your Jamf Pro URL or any of those like that. I work for Jamf. I did with Jamf Pro URL. Other MDMs are available. You could put it to a web link. You could put little shortcuts. You could change the wallpaper. You could really tailor all of this to what makes sense to whoever's going to read it at the end of the day, if someone is looking at it at the end of the day. So for this one here, we made a custom VM with an enrollment profile at the desktop. Next steps, double click, follow those prompts. VM is enrolled. You can absolutely enroll these. Tart also has commands where you make this as your base VM. Then when you're sending out commands of that, it can randomize the serial number. So it's always generating a new serial number each time. You're not worried about those conflicts. You don't get to specify the serial number there. That is important. So why is it though back in like 2018, we had the Intel chips, we had our blog post where we could customize that hypervisor, we could put in the model, we say we have all these broken machines, they're all Apple Silicon. Why can't we just insert and then leverage the automated device enrollment? And that's really because Apple's platform security between 2018 and now is unrecognizable. The way Apple's gone through their approach, who remembers the talk earlier today from Apple, right? Who knew about those X-raying their devices from a hardware level, right? You don't count. I knew you'd already seen it. But no, Apple takes their physical hardware security very seriously. And that aspect of it there, if it was that easy to circumvent with a hypervisor, with a virtualization layer, then they're not doing their job on a security posture. And as part of that enrollment and talking and activating to Apple's enrollment servers through automated device enrollment, again, that would be a bypass of their security. So the way you used to be able to do it was just an absolute no-go for their security posture. So that is why we're at there now. And as I'm sort of like going through, if you wanted to sort of build out Apple, you can get Apple EC2 instances in AWS. They've sort of built out those sort of things like, okay, how do we prompt an end user if we want to test that there? We made a file onto someone's desktop. You can make a launch daemon that's going to prompt them. They still have to click, they still have to accept, right? But you could be really annoying with it if you wanted to, right? You could have that launch daemon checking for things, all that can be predefined and set as part of that VM is the way you go. Yeah, so if you search Apple EC2 or Mac EC2 AWS Jamf enrollment, all the GitHub stuff is all there as well. As an example of something that we put together for internals, mainly for our salespeople who needed access to a testing machine so they could demonstrate it by there. This is something I helped with the team where we didn't want them to just double click on an enrollment profile. We actually wanted to show that user enrollment experience. So the file on the desktop, it's two files, PDF. It's just copying from a local directory as part of that build. It is not writing a PDF on the fly, but then it is creating a web link file on that. So when they go through, custom wallpaper as well though, not all of that VM was created without any interaction at all. And then as part of it, we're even actually submitting it up to a private Elastic Container registry. So we're using AWS at Jamf But basically that's where you have your own private Docker registry, your private tart registry, so it can download. It's only available within your organization. All that is very, sorry. So all of that's sort of automated from start to finish. We upload it through to GitHub. GitHub then says, yep, I'm going to build this, sends it through, job done. Maybe someone tests it afterwards just to make sure. That's probably the most a user will look at it. So if we circle back though to those advanced workflows, when I first started looking into how we could do these automations and integrations, I met with a sort of very good friend of the community, Will from AWS. He's been at Xworld before, loves Apple stuff. And I wanted to sort of whiteboard out a process of how we're sort of leveraging this technology effectively. So he invited him around. We whiteboarded all that. Because if we look at some of these options inside our tart help page, or the help commands, we see where it's supporting that OCI. So the OCI is an open container initiative. So this is a industry standard, I think, developed by Docker and a few other organizations around how you can host and supply containers for things like virtual machines, right? So if we want to build our VMs and we have those customizations and there may be things that are very specific for your organization, you don't want to put them out on the internet for anyone to download them, right? If you do, there's a lot of people I'd like you to talk to say don't do that. So we wanted to okay, we're going to build this, we're going to host this, I'm going to host it in AWS. And every major cloud provider has an OCI type registry. Again, at Jamf, we use AWS, so I wasn't that surprised when I first started looking at like Amazon has ECR. What I was surprised was how easy it was to set up what they call a private registry. I literally went next, gave it a name, and I'm like, okay, well, how do I get all these things up to it there? If I click that view push commands button, which that orange are there, all of these push commands, they say Docker in them. Literally change the word Docker to tart, and that's it. You get the token, you pipe it through, it registers and sees that OCI as a location, and you're done. That was something I was like, that was very, very surprising to me. So I started playing with that a little bit. I met them with Will, and we had a bit of a whiteboarding session about how we could maybe take an AWS EC2 Mac as our primary node, because you can only virtualize a Mac VM on Apple hardware, right? And when you get a Mac EC2 instance, that is bare metal hardware. That's not them hackintoshing anything. So like if we had a dedicated Mac EC2 that's enrolled and that's secured and that's managed and that's our point of thing, maybe we have that running the Packer, building out the VMs, hosting the VMs for any of our CI/CD pipelines. But I'll admit, after doing what was probably an hour of that there, I started feeling like this with that whiteboard. All right, so it was a lot, and that wasn't even all of it. There was just more and more stuff because we went on tangents, but it was a good sort of session. But the idea behind it would be, you have something with like your GitHub or GitLab, any of your sort of CI/CD to trigger. That might then go into your in AWS thing. It would go probably to a code pipeline, which then code build, which then would trigger some function depending on your organization, Lambda, scripts, maybe an SNS topic as well to get an email or an alert that this is occurring, which then would then trigger your EC2 Mac to then run. And again, your EC2 Mac is enrolled into Jamf. It's already got Packer installed. But then as it blows out, and we're telling it to run a tart VM. Now, depending on the hardware that you provision with it, maybe you want to have a bunch of them. Don't break it. But these are the idea where like you're not paying for the VM running inside of it. The way AWS does their pricing on that there is you pay for it for 24 hours minimum, and then it's on the usage. So it ends up being a little more cost effective as you're running it, rather than trying to spin up an EC2 instance to run a 15-minute task for a code build and then tear it down. That's your minimum 24-hour build all the time. The bill goes through the roof. So that was our idea for doing all that. And the way we're sort of thinking about that is well, the primary node is managed, the primary node is secured, everything else inside is just going to be temporary. There was less of a requirement for needing it to be enrolled. Again, maybe varies for different people in the organization. I think I put too many icons in this. Where are we up to now? One more? Yeah, one more. Huh? It's more than the two in the ULA, yes. I haven't actually tried to run 9 of them, but you might have ones in different things because you might not be running them all at the same time. You can suspend, you can stop, you can start. All of these sort of processes are available as well. If you are using something like GitHub Actions or GitLab as well, Xeras also do provide these runners that you can pay for as well. I think they're running a lot more higher process. I don't know what their costs are. That would be something you take up with them. But and I also don't know if your organization would allow it, depending on what you're trying to do, if you're engaging them external with that versus if you're running it on your own hardware internally. But having that sort of ability is pretty useful.
So what they're hosting the Mac for you?
Yep. And they provide how you run the runners and stuff like that. They've got examples there for GitHub, GitLab, and then if you are that so inclined to build your own. So at the beginning of this, we said we were going to show something. So yes, there is the pie or the tart. On the left, go to tart.run. That's our website there. On the right is Rob's MacDuck presentation. If you haven't watched it, I highly encourage you to watch that. He had a lot more fun with it than I did. He also had a little more time. Also, check out the MacAdmins podcast. The most recent episode, he was on that, talking about the same sort of thing. So it was a very helpful that he had already done a lot of the groundwork for me. I'm happy to stand on his shoulders and call myself tall. But with that, thank you all for listening to me. Sorry, I'll put the QR codes back for those who haven't got them. If anyone has any questions, let's fire away.
Big hand, that was great.
Oh.
Yes.
You kind of answered it at the end there, but I was looking at that. Rather than sort of like running something as a runner in the cloud and in AWS and all that sort of stuff, if you were to set that up, have you played with getting like GitHub, GitLab and all that stuff to run runners on your own hardware that you own? Have you sort of looked at that, or is it?
I haven't looked at that because that started looking a little too complicated, and if I could use something that was in the cloud and have something connected to it, because then how do I have GitHub authorized to a machine that's on my machine? You know, you have a GitHub token or a GitHub auth session, but so the idea of you have like a Mac Mini sitting on your desk that you want to have physically secured in that, but you have something triggered from GitHub to then run that there. I'd say it is doable. I just haven't done that.
Okay. It is, because Mac runners on GitHub are about 10 times the cost of Linux runners.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, because they have to be on physical hardware. Yeah. Something for you to try.
Stupid thing I'd do.
Sounds all right.
Hi, thank you, Daniel, for the talk.
Thank you for listening.
So I'm pretty new in the Mac world, and I've been having to deal with AWS, the Macs in AWS specifically, and we've been using AMIs instead.
Yep.
What would you say that the benefits of using Tart over AMIs are? Because, well, obviously you can create an AMI the same way that you can create this Tart and put an ECR.
Yeah. So it really does depend on your use case. If you're building these VMs that are going to be just to run a specific task and then die, then an AMI is actually going to be more expensive for you, because with a Mac EC2 instance, it is a reserved instance because it's physical hardware. It's still in that lovely box that they're in with the 10 gig NIC and their storage, stuff like that, but it is a minimum 24-hour use. So if you're only running it for a task, it's going to be, so a lot of developers will use this for code signing because you need an Xcode thing, but they need it to be central because that's got the keys and all that sort of process. But a code signing process might only take 15 minutes, but you've guaranteed or paid for 24 hours. And it's going to be different runs and stuff like that because they want to tear it down, spin up, tear it down, spin it up. So that's where you'd be looking to run the VMs there. If you're trying to host a Mac for someone to use as like a day-to-day, kind of like you're trying to do like a thin client, they dial in and they VNC and stuff like that, you're going to probably run into certain aspects where if you're trying to run too many VMs on one physical EC2, and that's going to have a probably poor user experience. So it is going to come down to what you want to use the Mac operating system for. AMIs are still, or AMIs? Yeah, AMIs instead of IAM, they like moving those around, are still valid, absolutely. And again, we have a very close relationship with Amazon, how you could try and automate that enrollment because it needs to be managed. If you're needing to walk through that VM build and then run, it might be a little unnecessary. But it does depend on your use case. Does that make sense? Okay. Thank you for the question.
One more question, anyone? No, we good?
Any questions about certificates? That's usually what I get.
Yeah. What are you going to do when they talk for 47 days?
We'll be fine. We go to Acme, right?
Sorry, second question.
Sure.
On the video with Packer automating the VM,
Yep.
it got to a point where Oh, basically, how do you automate 2FA for like installing Xcode, for example? Because that was one thing that I was always like, I'm trying to automate Xcode installation, and it asks for 2FA, and I just
To install Xcode?
yeah
In the App Store.
in the AMI.
Oh, in the AMI. Sorry. Yeah. You don't need to do that if you're doing it through a VM build with Packer, because you can run it through the XIB file instead, and you're not actually going through the App Store.
Okay.
Yeah, and like you can look at their examples have Xcode already installed. Someone's gone through that there. Their Packer files include ones of how you install Xcode, and you can have a look at that. I don't know how that works with the Mac EC2, but I reckon there's probably a good sort of correlation between those two. So yeah, I'd have a look at those templates that they put up. And yes, 47 days. The previous message was like, oh, it's going to expire, and they're going to change that in August, I think he said, 2029. It's March 2029. TLS certificates go down to 47 days, so be ready. That is coming.
Right, one more time. Please join me in thanking Daniel.
Thank you very much.